In this lesson, we're going to look at Mono for Android within the Visual Studio 2012 environment. We'll create a new project and look at the folders and files that are created by Visual Studio. Then we'll run the project in the emulator. So we'll start off by creating our new project, and you'll note that because we have Mono for Android installed, we have the Mono for Android project selection type. And we're looking for an Android application, and we'll name that First App. Now, Visual Studio has created a project for us, and it's added a number of folders, and it's opened up the first file called activity1.cs. In Android, an activity is roughly the equivalent of a Windows form or a web page. And the code here, as you can see, is done in C#. You could do VB, but we're talking about C# in this course. And it starts off by telling us that the main launcher is true, which indicates that this activity is going to be the first activity that is shown when the application is started. It also defines the icon that's shown on the Android program area. So now we'll take a look at the folders, and there's a properties folder which has assembly info in it, which is as normal on any kind of C# project, and there's not anything particularly different about this assembly info than anything else. In the reference folder, again, we have the usual system references, but we also have a reference to mono.android, which allows this project to deploy to an Android device. In the assets folder, we have a text file called About Assets. This folder allows you to put in files that will be deployed or bundled with the application. So you could put in things like image files or text files or whatever you might want to use. And then we have the resources area, and this is one of the areas that you'll end up spending a lot of time in. The drawable folder, as you might guess from the name, provides an area for image files. And this is actually the icon image for our application. Of course, you can change that. The layout area is probably the most interesting. And by default, they give us a main.xml. And this is actually the design surface. And it's similar to a web page in that it's an XML as opposed to a designer like a C# Windows form designer. And it has two views. The design view, which you can use to drag and drop widgets on, and a source view, which is XML. And you can see that there was a button on the designer form, and this is the XML that's generated. There's a values folder, which has a file called strings.xml, and you can put in any string resource that you want, and this would allow you to localize your string resources. And then we have the resource.designer.cs. And the most important part of this is that it's auto-generated by all of the other things that you do in the resource file, so you don't really want to change it. But it's somewhat interesting in that you can drill down into it and take a look at various things, like if we take a look at the layout main, this is the ID that was given our main AXML file. So, we'll give this a run. Now we're going to run it in the emulator, and I'll just start that process now. It's going to build it, and then it's going to ask what I want to deploy to. And I already started an emulator, but if there wasn't an emulator started already, or if you had plugged in a device, you'd have an option for that. But if there wasn't an emulator already started, you could use this link to start an emulator image. I've not done that because it takes basically forever to come up. So I wanted to attempt to get this running as quickly as possible. The emulator is extremely slow in coming up, and it's extremely slow to deploy to, as you can tell at this point. Mono for Android is free for the emulator. However, it is not free for devices. So in order to deploy to a device, you actually have to pay for the framework. And here is our application up in the emulator. And when I click the button, it just starts counting clicks. So that's pretty much all that application does. And we'll close it. Now, if we go back to Visual Studio, you'll note that it's still debugging. So we actually have to stop it. Android doesn't really shut down an application until the operating system itself deems that it should. It's essentially minimized in background and not really running, but it's still a live application until it's garbage collected. So that's our first run in Visual Studio.